Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to Mammal 3, and it's time for the judge commentary on the last two stages we just played through. Starting with 143rd place, Suzy Love by Moony Moon. This stage got a 39.8, with a 2 in difficulty, 12.2 in design, 8.8 in fun, 5.8 in creativity, 5.2 in aesthetics, and 7.8 in functionality. Mick. Okay, let me see if I've got the plot straight. We've just met a friendly Suzy hive mind who actively encourages us to talk to them throughout the level about various mundane things. Their dad is a giant Suzy who doesn't like you for some reason, and has a bunch of unruly pet snakes. Considering the level's called Suzy Love, my first instinct is that we have an overprotective dad on our hands, especially considering his hive mind of kids seems particularly eager for conversation? Maybe? I'm gonna be frank, I have no idea what's actually going on here. I didn't expect to be saying any of these sentences, and I'm very confused. As for the actual level, while I like the concept of friendly Suzys, about time they start paying their dues, they don't really do a lot. Their interest level peaks with the first token. After that, it's pretty much just ride the Suzy until you need to jump off. And if you miss, well, better hope you have jet and or magnet energy, maybe the occasional bike. It's an alright idea, but it needs far more variety and also to be a bit less awkwardly punishing. As for the rest of the level's denizens, they're all just there. I barely remember any of the enemy encounters that didn't relate to the weird plot, which isn't helped by the largely non-existent and slightly broken visuals. Overall, this is a very bizarre nothing level. Shinryu. I have many questions, none of which I'm sure have straight answers. In all seriousness, this level is just odd, to the point where I'm a little unsure on what to make of it. The whole idea of using Suzys as platforms is an interesting idea at first glance, but there's only so much you can do with what's essentially a small, fast platform that can only move from side to side, since the up and down variant would likely crush you more often than not. That said, they still probably could have worked with a few supporting gimmicks. The dust blocks in particular had the potential to make things more interesting, but they're only used once in the whole stage. Since the main gimmick is so bare bones on its own, most of the level essentially amounts to a series of basic platforming segments with some precision jumps/falls if you're going for the tokens. It feels like the core concept is there, but wasn't fleshed out fully, which is always a bit disheartening to see. There's not even much more to the stage beyond that, aside from some strange aesthetic choices, such as water tiles being used as solid ground. Yeah, that did confuse me at the start, and some glaring functionality issues to go with them. There's a spot near the last token where you can get above the ceiling of the next segment, along with phasing through what should be solid tiles in the process, which is very easy to stumble across even by accident. Yeah, think I found that too. There's also the Suzy NPCs, whose positions get offset when you talk to them from the opposite direction. Then again, that's not the most confusing thing about them. I usually don't account for flavor text and lore in reviews, so this is more of an idle observation than anything, but most of the Suzy's dialogue was straight up bizarre. It was almost a little unnerving in some aspects, such as that hive mind comment, to the point where I was wondering if the stage was going to take a dark turn later on. Of course, there's no big twist or anything like that. This is just a rather strange but ultimately basic level. Patchy. Ride on the Air of Love. An odd premise of building a level where you're given the ability to ride on the Suzys. The way the level uses this, it's somewhat awkward. With how fast the Suzys move and how you're stuck with a one-tile platform throughout the ride, that doesn't really allow for a whole lot of complexity and variety. As a result, the challenge progression throughout the level feels bumpy and unnatural. When each time a Suzy-type maneuvering is demanded, it's one quick fall to spiky doom if you ain't careful. Trying to slide through a one-tile gap on one of these things is tense. I'm glad it's only really required to do on one occasion. The rest of the level is just random Suzy NPCs, I guess, which I really don't have a comment about. Doesn't really add to the design of the level, just strange. The graphics aren't much to write home about. Non-coherent theming of tile sets that seems to change every room, with bare minimum amount of background decoration. The music is definitely love-struck, but not exactly fitting for an action-filled platforming Blue Bomber game. Flashman85. I don't even know where to start with this one. Maybe I had fun? I laughed a few times, enjoyed the creativity of a couple screens, and got swept up in the surreal experience of mistaking this 8-bit rendition of They Might Be Giants' Sapphire Bullets of Pure Love for a cover of Owl City's Dental Care. Everybody wants a rock band to wind a piece of floss around. That was a They Might Be Giants song? Huh. I don't think I've ever actually heard that one. I like that group. I'll have to actually check out that song later, but I digress. This level confuses me on every, level. Scatterbrain, that's the word. There's almost a unified theme, almost a coherent narrative, almost a sense of flow to the gameplay, but something always gets in the way. The end of the level is a good example. The last NPC tells a joke that doesn't offer any closure to the story and, to me, doesn't make any sense. Suzy's have been friendly the whole time, but now we inexplicably need to fight one. The boss music is in a different style that doesn't fit with They Might Be Owl City. Anything that isn't a Snakey or a Suzy never sticks around long enough to feel like a meaningful part of the level. NPCs break the fourth wall in a way that makes me wonder if it's the dialogue writer, not the characters, trying to communicate with me. Each area feels like it was constructed in isolation and then attached to the rest of the level wherever it would fit. I like the mini-boss fights. Any token challenge with Suzy platforms, which should really be indestructible, is actually pretty decent. By my standards, Sniper Joes are used correctly. Thinking that Dr. Wily created these Suzys, I got a good chuckle out of "Our Dad Doesn't Like You." In retrospect, maybe that was referring to the boss. I was going to prolong this review by thinking of another song reference to Shoehorn, the kind with teeth, but it's old and it's totally over now. And Ace Spark. I think the level is best exemplified by the introduction of the main gimmick to the level, the titular Suzys. It is barely functional, somewhat confusing, feeling just plain wrong, with a smidge of random instant death out of nowhere. The Suzys seem to get stuck on invisible blocks, warp around the room, and can inexplicably crush the player. In certain rooms, they can permanently despawn, leaving the player stranded and forcing suicide. Further hampering things is the unfinished nature of the graphics and tile work. This means that conveyance is non-existent, including moments where the player has multiple paths, but does not know where to go. Due to the background being black at all times, there's no difference between a pit and the path you were meant to travel down. Yeah, I kind of agree. Navigating this stage was weird. It was kind of difficult to tell which way was progress and which way was a bonus for one of the tokens. There are virtually no enemies in the stage other than the two mid-bosses, which are simply time wasters, and the room layouts with these enemies is poorly thought out, making avoiding damage very difficult. Outside of these two encounters, there is no challenge to the level. The boss certainly exists and is 100% expected. Kind of wish the Daddy Suzy at least had a sprite at it. Think of it. Give Papa a mustache. I need to see this now? I need to see an octopus battery with a jazzy mustache? Yes? If this review sounds negative, well, I didn't dislike playing this. I did like the idea you had going with the gimmick of the stage, but it was just poorly executed. It does have charm in its own way. It's one of the few stages of this contest to manage to maintain its charm in spite of the large numbers of NPCs, mostly down to some non-cringeworthy writing. But charm doesn't carry too far when the stage it's a part of is merely just below average. Overall, I would say this was kind of a simple, inoffensive stage. The idea is an interesting one. I do think there might be more potential as to what you could do with writing Suzys like that, but I'm not entirely sure what. I'd have to have a list of what all the possible default engine gimmicks are to see if there are any that it could work with in an interesting way. Like the dust blocks, that was something that could work. There might be something interesting you could maybe do with Yoku blocks and writing on Suzys, but I'm not really sure how well that would work, but it is a possibility. There's things you could experiment with that I think that could flesh out this idea a bit more. As for talking to the Suzys, yes, it is a very surreal experience. A strange little acid trip of a stage. Honestly, I had fun going through it. Like I said, very inoffensive. I've definitely played worse. And now, 142nd place, Glass Factory by Game Trooper. This one got a 40.14, with a 2.6 in difficulty, 15 in design, 8.8 in fun, 3.8 in creativity, 7.8 in aesthetics, and 9.2 in functionality, with a 10% leak penalty. Also, come to think of it, I have to wonder, since this was basically 2 stages in one, does the difficulty rating only consider the main path, or does it consider the entire stage, i.e. both stages? I'm legit curious about that. Anyway, moving on. Mick. On the subject of Glass Factory itself, there's not a whole lot to say. It grabs a decent selection of assets and applies them in ways that are functionally fair, even if they aren't amazing. A few of the chill block rooms stood out as being interesting, such as the Crystal Joe Tower and the drop into the Sunset Room. However, as much as Shield Attacker tries, he isn't interesting by himself. For that matter, the vast majority of the level felt boring beyond the aforementioned setups. Some interesting concepts aside, this feels like a standard ice level without much to it, so it's just sort of there. Also, the classy Glassman is a complete pushover. Bulky Glassman is far superior. Tongue. What's more important is Volcanic Furnace. Oh, so that's the name of that place. Sigh. I get the feeling you didn't read the rule about keeping yourself anonymous when making that quiz, because between the quiz relying on knowledge of who made the level and the reappearance of a MagMammal 2 entry, it's impossible to not know who made this. Well, it was possible for me. It's been years since I played MagMammal 2, so I did not remember that stage at all, since apparently it is reused, if I'm reading this right? Yeah. So, I completely missed on that. At any rate, Volcanic Furnace seems improved from MagMammal 2. The Guts lifts still have issues with desyncing, but the tile set is significantly better looking and the level is a lot more focused. It also has a more interesting boss fight than Glassman, and just more interesting setups than Glass Factory in general. I ultimately enjoyed the revamp, although I wish you would try to do it more discreetly. That may very well have led to a worse placement than the last contest, which is a bit of a shame. Shinryu. To quote Pyro from the previous contest, "Gee, I wonder who made this level. I can't tell." Putting aside the obvious for now, there's not a whole lot to say about the main stage itself. Enemies and gimmicks are introduced well enough, but nothing meaningful is ever done with them afterwards. Their placements are very basic and offer little to no challenge, which makes nearly every screen feel like an afterthought. There are two exceptions to this. The vertical room with Crystal Joes on both sides is one of them. Then there's the ice block room with a Crystal Joe to the left, plus a shield attacker floating above. Both these parts actually forced me to pay attention to what was happening on screen, as opposed to just mindlessly going through enemies and occasionally stopping for a crystal generator. It makes me wish the rest of the level was just as engaging. This especially applies to the boss, who I'd honestly rank close to Toadman for how stunningly easy he is. Of course, this is all just in relation to the main level. As far as the secondary path goes, I don't think I really need to go into detail on why including it was a bad idea. I think it would have been a better move to repurpose the concepts found here and use them for the main level, since the enemies and gimmicks tend to complement each other a bit more. It's not that much more difficult than the main stage, but it's certainly more engaging. Aside from that final stretch with the flame geysers and guts lifts, I'd say it's a decent improvement over its previous version. Yeah, I had issues with that last stretch. With all that being said, however, I can't exactly ignore the fact that it's a rehash of a MagMammal 2 stage. It doesn't make up for the main stage as a whole, nor does the other end boss. He's not quite as bad as Not MagMammal 1 Glassman, but his fight is still incredibly easy for how simplistic his pattern is. Overall, I think the time and effort that went into sprucing up Volcanic Furnace 2.0 could have been better spent on the main stage. Patchy. Instead of a man, it's a factory? This stage completely baffles me, left me speechless and absolutely confused. The stage name, the stage theme, all pointing towards an expectation that this might be a tribute to Glassman and MagMammal 1, but it's really not. It's more like a parody? A spoof? But I'm not laughing here. At points it feels like it's trying to insult the original entry, which I hope was not the intention. That side tangent aside, the stage uses completely default gimmick and enemy assets, with, quite frankly, very basic architecture and generic enemy setups, e.g. screen-long winding hallways, shield attackers / Joes setups that only pose to pad out playtime. I suppose the chill blocks are used somewhat alright here, definitely good enemy choices that cause the player to be careful about using their jumps while on the blocks. Kinda rubs me in the wrong way that this is trying to piggyback on the success of the aforementioned entry. The level isn't all that remarkable otherwise, so I suppose the oddity does make it stand out a bit. It has this weird trivia question section, and then it leads to yet another reference to a past MagMammal entry? What? This time is Volcanic Furnace from MagMammal 2, a very odd choice as a reference. Here the portion of the stage kinda suffers the same issues as the entry there, namely the unforgiving guts lift sections with the abundance of knock-you-off enemy types. Otherwise, it's a fire theme level through and through. Flashman 85. This level, well, levels, plural, leaves me with a profound sense of disappointment. It is the disappointment of a MagMammal 1 Glassman reference that lives somewhere between misfired parody and cheap appropriation. It is the disappointment of revisiting MagMammal 2's Volcanic Furnace, presented here as an unrelated secondary level that's longer and more derivative than the primary one. Nostalgia and remakes are fine, but only if they celebrate the old with something meaningfully new. I'm not convinced that's the case here. What's old feels old. A shoehorned visit to Nightman's bar, a Deep Thoughts-style quiz, challenge setups lifted from Blizzard Man, shield attackers being shield attackers, etc. New enemies and text boxes aren't enough to forgive Volcanic Furnace's virtually unchanged architecture and gimmick structure, which might have worked if the factory were, say, closed down for winter with everything iced over. Although they try to mix things up, the bosses need work. Glassman is neither a worthy opponent nor a comedic pushover. Scorchman sets up an obvious MagMammal 2 tier boss joke but delivers the wrong punchline, and his sprite has a glaring chunk of white that should be transparent. This is characteristic of the level as a whole, really. The humor never quite lands with me, and there's a lack of attention to detail, e.g., dialogue that needs more proofreading, boss doors that don't lock, unbalanced music volume, easily cheesed challenges, breakable blocks that look icy instead of glassy. On the upside, some elements are executed well. The quiz questions are totally appropriate, though the first question doesn't account for going left first. Volcanic Furnace looks better than ever. The ice block setups were pretty good. The reskin break dash block makes me happy. If this level weren't tethered so tightly to the past, and if it committed to a single premise, I think I might enjoy it. Ace Spark. What the... hi. Game Trooper, right? Welp. Welpy welpy welp welp. I might have overlooked the whole blatant spoiler of who this is if it wasn't for the rather cute question leading to the second stage that asks the player, and therefore also the judges, if they had submitted before, so that just kinda beats me across the head with your identity. Also, we don't get the names of the submitters, so that was a fun 50-50 brute force death. Look, a stage that sort of attempts to remake another stage. 2, in fact. And I don't know how exactly you broke the tokens, but you did, rendering so much of the extra side rooms and challenges in the second stage all very pointless. You didn't do yourself any favors by comparing yourself to the other much better Glassman. I won't say it doesn't end up a new unique experience, just saying it didn't help. The squid on mid-bosses never really offered anything new, even when mixed with new layouts, so quickly wore out its welcome. But the biggest offender here was Crystal Joe. He was very consistently amounted to wasting the player's time, especially when paired with other shielded enemies and gimmicks. In the first half of the stage, shield attackers also fell into this trap, but they managed to somewhat redeem themselves by the second half by becoming obstacles rather than time sinks. The Chill Man blocks were used reasonably fine. Nothing really noteworthy, and some screens look awfully familiar. I will note that the shoot to make a stairway room was rather annoying when you need to utilize the accessibility buster options. Doesn't really impact the score, just something to note. End up having to rely on weapon swapping to get through here. Then there's the second half. Honestly, outside the novelty of recognizing a middle-tier MagMammal 2 stage, the new Volcanic Furnace is just overall so much worse than the stage it's based off. It either errs on the side of too easy, or it just does something worse. There's not a lot to say here without repeating my previous review of Volcanic Furnace, so just reference the original review and remove the reference to the Bomb Man enemies. Did not appreciate the Fireman totem that you have to stand on, with the very major chance of just getting knocked into the pit. Fun. Let's end off on the 2 new bosses. Your Glassman sucks. He just sucks. I'm sorry to be this harsh, but if you're going to use Crashman as a base, which is perfectly fine, several bosses have done so in both this game and MagMammal 2, and come up with reasonable Robot Master fights, this is so pathetically easy that it almost defeats the point. The Fireman? Scorchman? Bernie Guy Dude Man? Whatever. On the second path, he's better. He looks goofy as sin with the edited sprite, and walking on thin air, which I'll assume is a reference to something I'm not familiar with. He'd put up a reasonable fight if it weren't for the rather obvious safe spot. With some more tweaking to the AI, this could have been a decent finisher.
The one thing I will say about Scorchman is when he was running in midair, I really thought you were supposed to slide under him, but apparently not. That didn't feel too clear to me. But anyway, this stage, or stages, I was not expecting a full second stage on this one, and yeah, admittedly, the reference fell flat with me because I did not recognize the stage, I did not recognize the guy. It has been many years since I have played MagMammal 2, and I have at least attempted to sleep several times since then. So, yeah, I honestly did not remember that. The 2 stages overall, I feel like overall the Glass Factory part tried to be more clever with setups in trying to figure out good ways of getting through things without, like, breaking the path with all the ice blocks and everything and dropping into spikes or what have you. Whereas the Volcanic Furnace area, that felt more just overall frantic and hazardous, and that last stretch was, that was a thing. Some of the traps there just felt very rude. Other than that, I guess this answers my question, because yeah, at the time of recording this, I haven't gone back and looked over my actual gameplay footage of these 2 stages, so I was going to check back later to see, did they say anything in the little hidden room about whether or not the guy had submitted before? But going by the judge commentary, it doesn't sound like he said anything about that. So yes, if you aren't super familiar with it, or have forgotten in the interim, it is just a brute 50-50 question. To be fair, it's a very short quiz, and it's quick to get through it, so it doesn't really matter too terribly much. But yeah, it is a bit of a thing. But yeah, with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, Flower Power!